I pretended to be asleep next to an envelope with $5,000 to trap a thief, but I never expected an 8-year-old boy to walk in.
Midnight, a Tuesday in January, a private library on Beacon Hill, snow ticking against the windows. Charles Vance sat in a wingback chair by a dying fire, eyes closed, breathing slow and even. 76 years old. Owner of half the glass towers on the Boston skyline, the kind of buildings that end up on postcards. And right now, at midnight in his own living room, playing dead. On the mahogany table beside him sat an envelope, unsealed, fat with crisp $100 bills, tipped toward the edge like it had slipped loose from his robe by accident. $5,000. Nothing about it was an accident. Charles Vance had not fallen asleep in that chair one single night of his life. He sat there most nights like this, breathing slow, waiting. And he could not have told you, if you'd asked him straight, exactly what he was waiting for anymore. He only knew the door was about to open. Someone was about to walk into that room with no idea they were being watched, and by morning, one of two things would happen. Either they'd reach for that envelope, the way every single person before them had, or they wouldn't. The fire popped once, low, and settled deeper into the ash. Outside, the snow had started coming down harder, the kind of storm that would shut the whole city down by morning, though Charles didn't know that yet. He only knew the house had gone that particular kind of quiet a big house gets after midnight, when even the pipes stop ticking, and the only sound left is your own heartbeat, slower than it had any right to be for a man doing what he was about to do. Down the hall, a service door creaked open, quiet, careful, the sound of somebody trying hard not to be heard. Small footsteps crossed the marble, lighter than any housekeeper's. Charles kept his eyes shut and listened, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, something in his chest actually moved. The door to the library eased open. Whoever it was stood there a moment, just breathing, and then stepped inside. Vance Holdings ran office towers from the financial district to the seaport, glass buildings that lit the harbor up at night, built from a single parking garage his father had left him 40 years back. By any measure that mattered on paper, Charles Vance was one of the most successful men in the city. Off paper, he was something else. Something quieter and a good deal more broken. His wife, Eleanor Vance, had died 11 years earlier, and there were mornings he still reached for her side of the bed before his mind caught up with the rest of him. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. He'd never once explained that to anybody, including himself. He still remembered a night early on, before the money, before the towers, when they were sitting on the hood of a rusted-out car in the parking garage his father left him, splitting a cold sandwich because that was dinner that week. Eleanor had looked at him and said, "Charles, don't ever let this place turn you into somebody who counts things instead of people." He'd laughed it off back then. He wasn't laughing now. His two grown children, Andrew and Catherine, called about 4 times a year. A birthday, a holiday, and 2 other calls, always right on schedule, that ended with somebody needing money. Charles paid every time, because that's what a father does. He noticed every time too, and the noticing had started to cost him more than the money ever did. 10 years back, there'd been a bookkeeper named Harold Pruitt, 20 years on the payroll, a man Charles had trusted enough to sign blank checks in his name. Charles left $600 sitting out on his desk one Friday evening, like it had been forgotten in a hurry. By Monday morning, it was gone. Charles never confronted him. He didn't yell, didn't ask a single question. He just had the desk cleared out over the weekend and a severance check mailed to Harold's house, and that was the end of that. That was also the night something in Charles Vance locked shut for good. If a man he'd trusted for 20 years would take $600 off an unlocked desk, what exactly was anybody's word worth? So he kept testing. An envelope here, a loose stack of bills there, set out like bait on a hook, just to see who would bite. And every single time, somebody did. Housekeepers, accountants, drivers who'd worked for him a decade. He never enjoyed it, not once. And if you'd asked him, he'd have told you it made him sick to his stomach every time he watched it happen. But some small, stubborn, broken part of him needed the proof, needed to keep being right about the world, even when being right about it was slowly killing him. He was 76 years old, and as far as Charles Vance was concerned, the last honest person he had ever known was buried 11 years ago in a quiet cemetery off the Jamaica way, and he had made his peace with never meeting another one. He had no idea that Tuesday night in January exactly how wrong he was about to be proven. 3 nights before the storm hit, Charles Vance's cell phone rang at 9 at night, and the name on the screen said Andrew. "Dad?" A pause, the kind that told Charles exactly where this call was headed before another word got said. "How's everything up there?" "Fine," Charles said. "What is it?" "There's a slip opening up at the Newport Marina. Prime spot, right off the point. Catherine and I were talking, and honestly, it'd mean a lot if you'd—" "How much?" Another pause. 40. 45 with the lift installed. Charles looked at Eleanor's reading glasses on the nightstand while his son talked prices at him like he was pricing out a contractor. "I'll have it wired tomorrow," he said, because that's what you do for family. And he hung up before Andrew could say thank you, because he already knew what the thank you would sound like. Efficient, done, on to the next thing. He sat there a long while after that call ended, phone still warm in his hand, thinking about how long it had been since either of his children had called just to talk. Not a birthday, not a holiday, not a number, just to talk. He couldn't remember. That bothered him more than the $45,000 ever could. There was exactly one person left in Charles Vance's life who'd earned the right to say something about all this. And that was Walter Briggs, his house manager. Silver-haired, steady, 25 years running the Beacon Hill property without ever once touching a dollar that wasn't his. That Tuesday evening, Walter had watched Charles set the envelope down on the mahogany table with the same tired, practiced motion he always used. And for once, he didn't bother pretending not to notice. "One of these days," Walter said, straightening a stack of mail by the door, "somebody's going to walk through that door and actually surprise you." "Unlikely," Charles said, settling into the chair, already arranging his face into that same old sleeping mask. "You said the exact same thing about me, 25 years ago." Walter clicked off the hallway light. "I'm still here." Charles didn't answer. He never had a good comeback for Walter, and that was probably the reason the man had outlasted every other name on the payroll. Walter let it go, same as always, and left Charles alone with his dying fire and his envelope and whoever happened to walk through that door next. Neither one of them had any idea it would be an 8-year-old boy in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, sneakers held together more by hope than by soul. Neither one of them knew that by sunrise, Charles Vance would be on the phone to Walter's cell, voice thick and wrecked, saying 4 words that Walter would remember for the rest of his life. "Walter, somebody surprised me." Nia Brooks was 34 years old and had spent the last year and a half working nights across the Vance properties, most weeks ending in that same Beacon Hill mansion, polishing marble floors worth more per square foot than the whole apartment she went home to before sunrise. Her husband, Marcus Brooks Sr., had died the year before after a long fight with an illness that drained every dollar they'd ever managed to put away, and a fair amount they hadn't. Near the end, in a hospital room that smelled like hand sanitizer and bad coffee, Marcus had gripped her hand with what strength he had left. "Promise me," he'd said. "Promise me our boy never goes hungry, never goes cold. Whatever it takes, Nia." "Whatever it takes," she'd told him, and she'd meant it. And she was still trying to keep that promise on a custodian's paycheck a year later, doing math in her head some nights instead of sleeping, trying to figure out which bill could wait a month and which one couldn't. By the time the funeral came around, she owed the hospital more than she'd made in the 2 years before it combined, and grief hadn't even had time to catch up with her before the collection calls started. Some nights she called her older sister, Renee Coleman, out in Providence, just to hear another voice on the line. "You're doing more than most people could," Renee told her once. Marcus knew what he was asking. He also knew you'd find a way. Nia didn't always believe that on the nights it mattered most, but she held on to it anyway, the way you hold on to anything that keeps you upright. What Marcus left behind, besides the debt, was an 8-year-old boy with his father's exact same slow, careful smile. Denzel Brooks was quieter than most kids his age, the kind of quiet that comes from watching a parent worry about money longer than any kid should have to. He kept a chipped plastic toy soldier in his pocket most days, one arm snapped clean off, paint worn down to almost nothing. The same one his dad used to line up in battle formations across their living room carpet. Denzel didn't talk about his father much anymore. Not because he'd forgotten him, because talking about him did something complicated to his mother's face, and Denzel hadn't figured out yet how to fix that. That night, Boston got hit with one of those late-season storms that shuts the schools down before the coffee's even finished brewing. Nia's sitter called at 6 in the morning to cancel. No family close enough to reach in time, no backup plan waiting anywhere. So Nia did the only thing a mother in her exact position could do. She zipped Denzel into his hoodie, walked him through 6 inches of fresh snow to the service entrance of a house bigger than his whole school, and led him down a hallway that smelled like lemon polish and old money. She sat him down on the thick rug in the far corner of the library and crouched to his eye level. "You sit right here." Her voice was low, urgent. "You don't touch one single thing in this room. Not the books, not the fire, nothing on that table. If Mr. Vance wakes up and finds you in this house, we are both out of a job tonight. And baby, out of a job means out in the cold. You understand me?" Denzel nodded, solemn, serious, in the exact way his father used to get before delivering bad news gently. He'd heard that tone in his mother's voice before. It wasn't really asking, it was pleading. And even at 8 years old, he understood what it cost her to use it on him. Nia kissed the top of his head, grabbed her cart, and disappeared down the hall toward the grand dining room, leaving her son alone in a room with a sleeping billionaire and an envelope worth more than she made in 2 months combined. A fire crackling low in the hearth, close to out. An old man slouched in a leather chair, breathing slow, eyes shut tight. An 8-year-old boy on a rug that probably cost more than his family's entire apartment, staring at a stack of $100 bills 3 feet away and close enough to touch. Behind his closed eyelids, Charles Vance felt the boy shift his weight on the rug and thought, "Here we go, another one." His pulse ticked up. He was already halfway to composing the phone call he'd make to Nia's supervisor come morning. Denzel stood. He crossed that rug, slow, careful, one sneaker with the sole starting to peel just like his mother's, and stopped right over the envelope. For a second, something flickered across his face. He was 8 years old, not a saint, and $5,000 meant something, even to a kid who'd never once been taught to steal. He thought about the electric bill on the kitchen counter with the red stamp across the top. He thought about his mother's shoes, falling apart the same way his were. Then he thought about something else. He thought about his dad, in that hospital bed, telling him real quiet that being strong wasn't about being the biggest guy in the room. It was about what you did when nobody else was watching. So instead of reaching for the money, Denzel looked past it. He noticed the old man's hands resting on the armrests, trembling slightly, the way hands do when a fire's burned down low and nobody's bothered to add another log. He glanced at the dying fire, then back at those shaking hands, and made a decision that had nothing to do with cash at all. He unzipped his own hoodie, still damp from the walk in through the snow, and laid it gently over Charles's knees like a blanket, tucking one corner in exactly the way he'd watched his mother do for him 1,000 nights. Then he noticed the envelope, teetering right on the edge of the table, one stray breeze from sliding into the cold ash below. He reached out with 2 careful fingers and slid it back to the flat, safe center of the table. Not toward himself, toward the middle, just so it wouldn't fall. He walked back to his corner of the rug, sat down, and wrapped his own arms around himself against the cold, because now he didn't have a hoodie to keep him warm anymore. Charles Vance sat there with his eyes shut, felt that small, damp weight settle over his knees, and had to work hard just to keep his breathing steady. 20 minutes later, Nia pushed her cart back through the library door, already rehearsing an apology in her head in case Denzel had so much as breathed too loud in that room. What she saw stopped her cold in the doorway. Her son's hoodie. The same faded gray one with the frayed cuffs she'd bought secondhand 2 winters back, draped unmistakably across the knees of Charles Vance's very expensive, very still suit pants. Every drop of blood in Nia's body ran cold. She dropped to her knees on the rug and yanked that hoodie back like it had caught fire, whispering apologies before she'd even finished processing what she was apologizing for. "I am so sorry, sir. He would never. Please, he's a good boy. I'll have him wait in the hallway. Please, don't." And kneeling there, a memory came rushing back she hadn't let herself sit with in months. Marcus, thin in that hospital bed in a way that still didn't feel real a year later, gripping her hand. "Whatever it takes, Nia." And here she was, about to lose the one job standing between her son and exactly that promise. Denzel watched his mother's hands shake as she folded the hoodie against her chest, and something in his own small chest twisted up tight. He hadn't meant to scare her. He'd only meant to help. That's when Charles Vance stirred in his chair and blinked his eyes open, like a man waking from a long, peaceful sleep, and Nia's entire world tilted sideways. Charles sat up slow, dragging one hand across his face, playing the part he'd perfected over a decade. Stern, cold. A man mildly, quietly furious at having his evening disturbed. His eyes landed on a small, damp patch left behind on the velvet arm of his chair, right where the hoodie had rested. "This chair," he said, voice sharp, "is upholstered in Italian velvet. $200 a yard. And now it's ruined." He looked from the chair to Nia, still frozen on her knees. "I'll need $500 for a restoration specialist. Tonight, if that's possible." "Please," Nia's words tumbled out fast, tripping over themselves. "Please, Mr. Vance, don't fire me. I'll pay for it myself. I'll work extra nights. I'll work weekends, whatever you need. He's a good boy. This is my fault, not his. I never should have brought him here." "You brought your son into my house without permission," Charles said, flat as a closed ledger. "On a night I was resting in my own library. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about that." That's when Denzel stepped forward. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even really scared, not the way you'd expect an 8-year-old to be in a moment like that. He walked right up beside his mother, calm as still water, and reached into the front pocket of his jeans. What he pulled out was small, plastic, faded almost gray from years of being carried around and rubbed between little fingers. A toy soldier, one arm chipped clean off, paint worn down to nearly nothing. He set it down on the mahogany table, right next to the envelope. "I don't have $500. He looked straight up at Charles Vance without blinking once. "But I have this. It was my dad's, before he died. He was my best friend, my dad. But you can have this instead, to pay for your chair. Just, please don't be mad at my mom. She didn't do anything wrong. It was me. I'm the one who touched your blanket." Nia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She hadn't realized until that exact second that her son had just given away the one object in this world he refused to let out of his sight, not even at bath time, not even at school. For a long moment, nobody in that library said a single word. Charles Vance stared down at that little plastic soldier sitting on his table, right next to $5,000 he had left there specifically to prove that everybody, eventually, breaks the exact same way. Something in his chest broke too, just not the way he'd planned for it to. Here was a boy with a hole in his shoe and a second-hand hoodie he'd just given away to keep a stranger warm, now offering up the single most sacred object he owned in the entire world, not to save himself, but to save his mother. A kid who had every reason on earth to grab that cash and run, and instead handed over a dead man's memory just to keep somebody else out of trouble. Meanwhile, Charles's own children, grown adults with every advantage money could buy, hadn't called him in over 2 months. And the last time they had, it was about a yacht slip in Newport. "There was no chair," Charles said, voice cracking around every word. He wiped his face, annoyed at himself for it. "I made that up. I've done this before, more times than I care to admit. Leave money out. Watch who takes it. He looked at the soldier like he didn't know how it had gotten there. "Everybody takes it, ma'am. Every single time. I stopped being surprised by it a long time ago." He almost laughed, and it came out wrong, cracked down the middle. "Your son just wrecked that for me." "So there's nothing wrong with the chair," Naya said slowly, still on her knees, like she needed to hear it a second time to believe it. "Nothing wrong with the chair," Charles said. There was never anything wrong with the chair. Charles thought about every envelope he'd ever left out over the years. Every person he'd quietly judged and quietly let go, Harold Pruitt included, a man who'd given him 20 years over one bad night and $600. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, he thought that maybe he'd been asking the wrong question the whole time. Maybe the test was never really about who would take the money. Maybe it was about who would put something down instead of picking something up. His eyes went wet before he could stop them, and Charles Vance, 76 years old, a man who hadn't cried at his own wife's funeral because somebody had to stay strong for the family, sat there in his own library and let the tears run down his face in front of a night custodian and her son. "I thought the whole world ran on thieves," he said. "Turns out, ma'am, you raised somebody I didn't think existed anymore." Nia sank the rest of the way to the floor, one hand over her mouth, understanding for the first time that the danger had never been real at all, and somehow that made the whole night hit even harder. Charles Vance stood up slowly, the hoodie sliding off his lap and onto the floor, and crossed the room to the heavy oak desk in the corner. "Mr. Vance, please." Nia was already shaking her head, still catching her breath. "You don't have to do anything. We're just glad nobody's in trouble. We'll go. We won't say a word to anybody about tonight." "Sit down," Charles said, not unkindly. "I'm not finished." He pulled open the top drawer and took out his personal checkbook, the one he used maybe twice a year for anything that actually mattered to him. He uncapped a pen and looked at Denzel, still standing there without a hoodie, arms crossed tight against the cold. "A lesson like the one your son just taught me doesn't get repaid with a bonus or a promotion or a pat on the back at the holiday party," Charles said. "That's not how tonight works." He wrote something down, tore the check free along its perforated edge, and pressed it into Nia's shaking hand. $10 million. Nia stared at it so long, the number stopped looking like a number at all. I can't accept this. This is..." "Buy your boy a real house," Charles said, cutting her off gently. "Somewhere warm, somewhere with a yard, if that's what he wants. Buy him a future that doesn't depend on a snowstorm closing his school and his mother sneaking him into a job she's terrified of losing." He looked down at the soldier still sitting on the table. "I'm keeping this, if that's all right with you, Denzel. He's going to sit right here on my desk from now on, next to my most important paperwork, so I never once forget the night a boy with a hole in his shoe taught an old man exactly what money can't buy." Denzel looked over at his mother, checking, the way kids do, whether this was actually allowed to be real. Nia nodded, tears finally spilling over, and Denzel nodded back at Charles. "Okay, but you gotta take care of him. He doesn't like getting left in the cold either." Charles laughed, short and rough and surprised, like it caught him off guard as much as anyone else in the room. "You have my word." They didn't leave the mansion right away. Charles called his attorney that same night, a sharp, soft-spoken woman named Diane Osei, who'd handled his affairs for 15 years and had never once, in all that time, gotten a call from him past 10 at night. She showed up in jeans and a coat thrown over her pajamas, took one look at the room, and didn't ask a single question about why. She just opened her laptop on the corner of the desk and got to work, making sure every part of it was done clean. No strings, no conditions, nothing anybody could take back later. "You sure about the number, Charles?" she asked once, quiet, just the two of them by the window. "I've never been sure of anything in my life," he told her, and she nodded and kept typing. By the time Nia finally pulled out of that long gravel driveway, snow still falling soft against the windshield, Denzel was already asleep in the back seat, worn out the particular way kids get worn out after living through something too big for their bodies to process all at once. Nia didn't drive straight home. She took a detour out past the Jamaica Way, toward the cemetery where her husband was buried, and parked with the engine running and the heat blasting, staring out at a section of headstones she couldn't actually see in the dark. She didn't get out. She just sat there with the check folded in her coat pocket and said, out loud, to nobody and everybody at once, "We're gonna be okay, Marcus. Both of us. I promise you, we're gonna be okay." In the back seat, Denzel stirred just enough to mumble something in his sleep that sounded almost like his father's name, and Nia let herself cry for real, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The good kind. The kind that doesn't hurt on the way out. She called Renee from the car before she pulled back onto the road, just to hear her voice. "You're going to think I've lost my mind," Nia said. By the time she'd finished explaining it, Renee had gone quiet on the other end for so long, Nia checked the call hadn't dropped. "Marcus always said that boy had something in him," Renee finally said. "Didn't he?" "Yeah," Nia said, throat tight, watching Denzel sleep in the mirror. "He did." Nia didn't quit her job that same week. She worked out her notice properly, because that's the kind of person she'd always been, and used the time in between to figure out, carefully, what a future actually looked like once fear wasn't running the whole show anymore. She and Denzel eventually moved into a modest house out in Dorchester. Nothing flashy, just a place with a furnace that worked, a small backyard, and a bedroom that belonged to Denzel and absolutely nobody else. Denzel went back to being a regular 8-year-old, more or less. He got a Celtics jersey for his birthday that winter, the first brand new piece of clothing anybody could remember him ever owning. He started drawing again, mostly soldiers, mostly superheroes, and his teacher kept every single page pinned to the wall behind her desk. As for Charles Vance, something in him softened that nobody in his own family had managed to touch in over a decade. He started calling Andrew and Catherine himself, picking up the phone first instead of waiting on theirs to ring, and the calls stopped being about marina slips and graduation gifts. One Sunday, Andrew called just to talk about nothing at all, a Red Sox game, the weather, and hung up without asking for a dime, and Charles sat there afterwards staring at the phone like it had done something remarkable, because it had. And that little plastic soldier never left his desk. Every visitor who noticed it, every board member, every attorney, every one of his own grandchildren, got the same answer when they asked what it was doing there. That, Charles would say, is the reason I still believe in people. Quietly, without any press release or ribbon-cutting photo, Charles started something new that year through Vance Holdings, a small fund set aside strictly for employees going through exactly the kind of stretch Nia had gone through. A few months of paid help with medical bills or childcare. No questions asked. No committee to beg in front of. Walter Briggs was the one who suggested the name, half joking over coffee one morning. Charles didn't laugh. He just told the accountant to put it on the paperwork exactly as Walter said it. They called it the Soldier Fund. That spring, Charles Vance did something he hadn't done in years. He got in his own car, no driver, and drove himself out to Dorchester, to a small house with a working furnace and a yard just big enough for one kid to run around in. Nia answered the door in an apron, flour on her hands, caught completely off guard. "Mr. Vance, I would have made the place look—" "It looks like a home," Charles said. "That's better than anything I could have asked for." Denzel came pounding down the stairs 2 at a time when he heard the voice, and stopped short in the hallway, suddenly shy in a way he hadn't been that night in the library. "I brought somebody to see you," Charles said, and reached into his coat pocket and set the chipped plastic soldier down on the little table by the door. "He's been asking about you. Kept looking cold up on that desk of mine, so I figured it was time he came home for a visit." Denzel picked it up carefully, the way you'd pick up something that mattered, and looked up at Charles. "You're gonna let him leave your desk?" "For an afternoon," Charles said. "I expect him back by dinner. But I thought maybe you and I could go find him a proper coat first. Something warm. Man's been out in the cold long enough." They walked to the corner store together, an old man and a boy, and came back 20 minutes later with a scrap of red fabric Nia recognized from an old scarf, tied around a chipped plastic soldier's shoulders like a cape. Denzel set him on the windowsill in the sun, and Charles Vance stood in that small kitchen a long moment, just watching, before he said what he'd really come to say. "Your son didn't just save his mother's job that night," Charles told Nia, quiet enough that Denzel didn't quite catch all of it. "He saved something in me I thought I'd buried with my wife. I don't know how to thank a person for that. I'm not sure there's a number for it." He looked out at Denzel through the window, arranging his toy soldier just so on the sill. "So I figured I'd just come by instead. Seemed like the kind of thing you say in person." Nia didn't have an answer for that either. Not right away. She just nodded and put the kettle on, and for the first time since the funeral, her kitchen was full of the kind of noise that meant everything was, finally, exactly as it should be. Walter Briggs drove him out there most Sundays after that, whether Charles asked him to or not, and waited in the car with the radio low while the old man and the boy walked the block to the corner store and back. "You planning on telling him he doesn't have to keep driving me around like this?" Charles said once, climbing back in with his coat dusted in snow. "Not particularly," Walter said, and pulled out of the driveway, and neither of them said another word about it, because neither of them needed to. Some nights, back in his own quiet house on Beacon Hill, Charles Vance still thought about that envelope, still sitting untouched in a drawer of his desk where he'd put it the morning after. He never set another one out again. He didn't need to anymore. He'd gotten his answer. Somewhere out there tonight, there's probably another envelope sitting on another table, in another house, waiting to see who walks through the door next. And maybe that's the question worth sitting with long after this story ends. Not whether you'd take the money if nobody was watching, but whether you'd notice the cold hands sitting right next to it instead. Charles had all the money in the world, but he was completely poor until an 8-year-old boy showed him what true love looks like. What would you do if you were in Charles's shoes? Let me know in the comments below, leave a like, and subscribe for more dramatic true life stories.